We have the honor to have our next and last speaker for the day is Dr. Maria Uhle. And if there's one institution that does exactly that, education and funding, that's the NSF. Maria is a program director for international activities for the Directorate for Geoscientists at the National Science Foundation. She develops mechanisms and agreements to foster international research collaborations through a variety of programs such as the Belmont Forum, the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research, and Future Earth. She is the current chair of the executive committee of the Inter-American Institute for the Global Change Research. Prior to serving at NSF, she developed partnerships in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia for the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and addressed Arctic and Antarctic research priorities at the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Before joining NAS, Maria served on the faculty at the University of Tennessee in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences, and her research focused on the fate of organic matter and contaminants in atmospheric, surface water, and soil environments from urban areas and the polar deserts of Antarctica. Please welcome Dr. Maria Uhle.
Thank you, Marga. This is a wonderful opportunity. I want to thank AAAS for inviting me, and I'm very humbled to be in the presence of my two previous speakers. What I'd like to talk to you today about is science diplomacy through an intergovernmental institutions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some examples from the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. And what we're looking to here is first understanding, and you've seen from this morning and through the interactive sessions where people are taping their opinions on what science diplomacy actually is. In this realm, I'm going to take the tact of using science diplomacy as ways to unite nations to pursue common goals, to address shared challenges, and bridge political and developmental divides. And so what we need to do here is focus on challenges that are larger than one country can address on its own, and those that require collaboration. So in my mind, science diplomacy is ripe for addressing just those types of things. And moving on for that, this is what I feel those are. So climate, water, climate change, biodiversity, things that, as Zafar said, don't go and recognize borders. So air pollution, air contaminants, things like that. So these are the quest of the Inter-American Institute is to really look at how global change affects the Americas themselves, and what can these countries do together that they can't do on their own to solve some of these common issues. So to give you a quick overview of what the IAI is, first of all, it was established in 1992 out of a follow-on to a Rose Garden speech not too far from here by President Bush Sr. in 1990 that called on global cooperation in global environmental change research. And several institutions were set up during that time, IAI being one of them. The mission really was to develop the capacity of science and technology in the Americas so that we could promote true collaborative interactions and to provide information for well-informed actions. So it is knowledge, scientific knowledge as the basis for decision making. IAI's core values really revolve around scientific excellence, international cooperation, and full and open exchange of information, and obviously focus on global environmental. So the vision that IAI is trying to achieve is to be an intergovernmental institute where scientists and decision makers can jointly address the critical issues associated with global change in the region. So we would like to follow on with the Future Earth kind of approach of co-design, so that it is not just scientists coming to the table and say, I can fix your problem and here it is. It is scientists and decision makers sitting down together so that they appreciate the perspective that each brings to the table to solve problems collectively. So what we're trying to promote here with this is science and scientific excellence is obviously the cornerstone of this. We want to make sure that decisions are made addressing the best science that we can possibly support in that. But we want them also to meet the needs of the member countries within the IAI. And we want to build, most importantly, I think, to build collaboration among the researchers, the stakeholders, and the decision makers. So again, this is the co-design of research, and this is what we are embarking upon. So over the years, we've had a new structure of the IAI. Typically, we have what we call the Conference of the Parties. That's where the member states comes together once a year to discuss what the topics of interest are, what are the pressing problems that we need to solve in the region collectively. That is supported through a science advisory committee, who each of the people there serves as their own entity. They serve as a person, not representing any one country. They are scientific experts from the region that have research based in the region addressing many of these problems. We have an executive council, and that is really just people to make sure that things keep rolling between every year's Conference of the Parties. And then we have a very active and very capable directorate, which I will explain to you in just a second, because that's evolved over time, really to meet the needs of the IAI and the region in terms of addressing issues and problems. One of the things that we have just started to do is we've established a new group that's going to help us bridge this link between science and policy. So we have what we're calling a Science Policy Advisory Committee. We have lots of acronyms, so we have a SAC and a SPAC and all sorts of things, but I'll try to keep that at the minimum. And really, this has really started to come from a new recognition that stakeholders and engagement with stakeholders is not an easy thing to do. As a funding agency representative, we like to try and push our scientists. We want you to have broader impacts. We want you to work with lots of stakeholders. But in your traditional academic progression, you're not trained on how to do that. And that is a very difficult thing to do, and it's a tall order. So the IAI is actually looking to help bridge that and to build even capacity in this as well. So the new structure of the IAI, we now have what we call a tripartite structure. So we have three offices centered in Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina. And these really came out of a recognition that we have to have more countries involved in this and to also play on the strengths of the individual countries. So Brazil has it's a very large, let's just say it's a scientific powerhouse in the Americas. And so to really benefit the member countries, we approached Brazil to be what we now call the Science Development Directorate. So they are hosting a group of people in Brazil at the space agency INPE, and we are developing sort of new collaborations, identifying new areas, so helping to set precedents for strategic planning in science. Argentina had always been very adept at the science policy liaison, so that seemed a natural outgrowth of this. So we've worked with the Argentinians to set up an office there, and so now we have our Integrated Operations and Financial Directorate is hosted in Uruguay, and so now we have 3 countries that are working together in Latin America that can help to push the IAI agenda forward. And this particular structure was just adopted in 2012. So we're still developing and working out all the kinks. So how do we, as the IAI, approach science, diplomacy, building capacity, doing those things? Well, we look at it through a few different avenues. Through collaborative research networks, so this is actual research. We have small grants where we can actually start to develop some capacity. We have young scientists involved in this. And we have what we call capacity building activities. These are workshops. These are symposia where we're bringing the policymakers and scientists and actually putting them in a room, locking the door, not letting them out until they agree on how to do something. No, it actually is not like that. But we are starting to bring those groups together so that they understand, science can say, I know the answer to this, but the decision maker will say, there are trade-offs. How do I go about balancing these things? And so the recognition from the scientists and the policy of each other's perspectives has really started to push things forward. And then we also have a little bit of what I call international band waving, which is our participation in international conventions like the UNFCCC or IPCC, things like that. So just a couple of very quick examples of how science and diplomacy and science and decision making has affected a few things from our outgrowths of our projects. So there was a collaborative research project on land use that looked at the dry forests in Minas Gerais in Brazil. And this got a lot of attention because originally there was a lot of disagreement between the state and federal classification of these areas. And one said that they were protected under law from deforestation, the other said it wasn't. So there was a state, anyone from the United States will appreciate state law versus federal law, and this is exactly what this is all about. So what happened was somebody got wind of the project that we had funded through the IAI, where scientists that were working with Brazil and Canada had come together, and they actually testified before the state high court and the federal attorney on what all the scientific results actually meant. And so what happened was the state law then was declared unconstitutional. So we had pure science that was not necessarily embroiled in all of the controversy, coming in, speaking, the scientific evidence for this classification, and it was actually adopted by the government. In the way that this has sort of moved forward is that through IAI, we were able to really start to educate decision makers on very complex issues of things like biodiversity, how ecosystems function, and how those are really coupled to the human natural environment. And they were presented in such a way that it was able to provide a basis for sound decision making. And so we would hold that up as a triumph or a win in our thing. A few years later, the Choppy Dry group was called on again. And this is interesting because the Federal Human Rights Commission was concerned that because of the deforestation policies, people were not able to have access to food. So here's this trade-off. Here's the science showing you, really according to strict science, these are a specific classification, and if you don't want to deforest dry forests, then this is the way you have to treat it. But what happens is if you look now down to the human dimension part, by doing that and classifying these things as protected, the local people were not able to grow food for sustainability. So so the group again was able to go in and talk with the legislature, and right now there's a new law that's being introduced to Parliament that is going to amend the original decision and to actually start to allow some of this because of the impact. So here is the science telling you one thing and being absolutely dead on, but now we need to look at it in terms of human dimensions. So now we're looking at trade-offs. So this again, I think, is a clear example of how science can help do this, but we have to be willing to weigh the options for this. And another example we had, so water science, and as Zafar said, that's a key issue in many of the conflicts and discussions and issues that we all face. So we had some water managers in Mexico and Arizona, and they were looking at how to determine the use of water for agricultural growth and herds and all sorts of crop mixtures and irrigation schedules. So how to best use this resource in a relatively dry environment. So what the group found was that a lot of the farmers will produce what grows well under average climate. So they'll determine that and plot. And that they'll irrigate to compensate for any rainfall shortage. And the problem is that a lot of the irrigation leads to overpumping. And so that has really started to stress the water resources in both Arizona and Sonora. So there was a group that brought together these managers from Mexico and from US in a time when there was a lot of tension between the US and Mexico, mostly due to drug trafficking and things. So our relationships weren't necessarily politically the best at that point. But in the spirit of collaboration, they were able to really focus on something that was affecting both of them. And at the same time, we had a small grant of seed money to Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia on a very similar approach. And so what the IAI did was to convene the water managers from Sonora, the water managers from Arizona, and the group from Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, together at the Aquasex Center of Excellence, which is actually a partnership between University of Arizona, Chile, and the IAI. And they were able to start to understand the perceptions of how water use would impact each of the different constituents. And what we found out was that initially Chile thought they would have much more in common with California. But what they found out was that their issues were much closer aligned with those of Arizona and Sonora, because of the Andean runoff is actually being depleted, and they're relying heavily now on pumping of groundwater. So they're pulling their resources up and out of that. So out of this, really, what happened was, because of this small collaboration and because of this small discussion between scientists and decision makers, Chile has now joined in this approach, and their Ministry of Public Works actually started to put some funds into the project, even though it wasn't addressing Chile at the time. So they were seeing the value of being part of a collaboration that would be, whose results actually would be transferable to them. And because of that, Chile now has, as its adhering member of IAI, they've actually included their environment ministry. So we've actually started to bring in more government voices and approaches to this. So the other approach that we tend to take with IAI is our participation in the Conference of the Parties, the COPs, in large international arena. So what this is doing really is giving scientists a voice in international politics. IAI has for a very long time has been able to support the participation of scientists, your graduate students, your postdoc, a professor, to come to what would be considered a very governmental approach to decision making, and to be able to learn and understand how these things happen, and to provide them, especially with a lot of the side events that happen at these things, to work with and understand and interact with decision makers at various levels. So this has been an approach that we've taken and quite frankly have been pretty successful at doing. So what does it actually mean to move towards science diplomacy? We saw the bridge. I think one of the things, at least from my personal perspective, is that many of these challenges require a coalition of the willing. You have to want to work together to solve something. And I think in a lot of ways, the scientists, they don't seem as much, that doesn't seem as an issue. It's where the decision makers and politics and things start to get into this that start to make things a little more difficult. But I think through capacity building and I would say co-design of research projects involving decision makers right from the beginning will go a long way toward helping this. I think it's very effective when you're addressing common problems. And that because of this, you start to foster trust between research and decision making. And for people to understand that if science comes and gives you an answer and you make a decision and another year there's more data and now you make a different decision, that is not changing your mind. That is not flip-flopping or whatever the current political decision is of the time. But what it is a clear understanding of how science works. We make our decisions based on the best evidence that we have at the time. And I think that understanding can go a long way to help bridge this trust between research and decision making. And I really believe that co-design and co-generation of knowledge is critical. It can't be one way. That's not to say that the science isn't robust, but you can have science that is informed by stakeholders. You can understand the challenges and the questions that they have. Education and training, that's essential, because we do not, as typical professors and universities, we do not train our students toward this dialogue. We don't. It's not something that is on anyone's radar. And I believe that you need to have a robust dialogue and to iterate and to move back and forth and be willing to fail. We are going to make mistakes, but you have to be able to learn from those mistakes and move forward. And I really believe that the young scientists, at least from my personal perspective, is that my young graduate students wanted to do exactly this. They wanted their science to make a difference to common problems that are facing humanity. And I think we need, as funding agencies and professors, we need to encourage that and we need to be able to reward that. And that we really need to start to use systems approaches. So looking at trade-offs and to realize that there will be trade-offs and that those decisions will have to weigh those trade-offs. So thank you very much.